Good morning, everybody. This is Diggs. This is another beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest. And today we're going to talk about this really cute little piglet called Boar. Now, we've had the opportunity to use him for quite a while. My Boar is Awakened 9, and we're going to talk about my experiences with him in Familiar Arena as well as other content in the game. Let's go ahead and dig in. So I think on the face of everything, I think a lot of people see Boar as directly inferior to Toko. And I was of that belief for quite a while, but I have continued to use Boar. I've continued to try different perspectives with him. And I do think he is maybe not the easy button A10 Toko, but he is definitely a very powerful familiar. And I think there are certain ways you need to use him and utilize him in order to bring out the best. Now, one of the things that I noticed with him that was actually really surprising and was pointed out to me by Kazuha on stream the other day was the stacking defense ability and how much CP that actually gives you. If we look at Boar's heart here, so this is the A9 version. Not only does he decrease earth damage taken for party members, keep in mind that's 2.5%, 5% for yourself. A lot of people run earth weapons in Lava Valley, so you could potentially be mitigating damage there, but it also increases defense by 2% for each dish effect, and that stacks up to 5 times. Now, that is a significant defense increase. For anybody that has ever used Saintly Circlet, it's very powerful in terms of being able to increase your CP and increase your survivability. Where this comes in would of course be in PvP or other type content where you do want your stats to be increased in combat. There's been a lot of people who have been running him in PvP with Might. A lot of people have been asking me, what do you think about going Might into Boar? I actually think Boar, if you look at his active ability, it deals 353.8% of attack as damage and stuns burned enemies for 3.5 seconds. The problem is the stun doesn't land all the time, and he's very easily telegraphed and easily dodged. So if your opponent's maybe not paying attention, you are going to be able to pull this off pretty effectively. But I think for the most part, landing the stun and actually getting it off is going to be pretty difficult. I think you're going to get more benefit out of his plus defense than you are potentially from the actual stun on the burned enemies. Now, I do think that he, because of this defense stacking ability, most people, if you're doing content that is going to be actually difficult in nature or that you need defense for, you are going to be eating food anyway. A lot of the content that I think about with regards to that is like the boss fights in Labyrinth, for example, or other PvE content that could be really difficult, or maybe you're just struggling and dying when you are doing farming because you're trying to farm higher level monsters. In terms of Familiar Arena, I was probably the most let down there. I think a lot of people have been let down in Familiar Arena by Boar, and I think he actually is very powerful. I think we just don't know how to utilize him right now. There is another content creator, Crypto Crow, if you guys are familiar with him. He did a whole video on it actually earlier today that came out that talked about how to utilize Boar in different setups and how Boar was used in his different setups. And for some, it was melee setups. For some, it was, trying to replicate free-to-play setups for other players. It's definitely a very informative video. I think, to try and summarize everything I've learned about Boar and the context of him, he definitely is more suited to a back line. The problem that I run into with Boar being in top 30 is that I do run into a situation where, because of my actual familiars that I have, I constantly am killed because I don't have a solid secondary tank familiar. So for example, I have a lot of attack familiars leveled, but I don't have a lot of solid secondary defense familiars without going into dual element, which seems problematic for me, or leaning too far into earth. So for right now, my familiar arena composition is basically what you see in front of you. I do sometimes swap out Might with Suryu. I also swap out Boar with Suryu. I do find that if I put Might in the front line, what does happen is Might dies too quickly. So I do try and, particularly with Suryu and Hippocampus right now, I do try to keep Might in the back line here, just so that he can survive that little bit longer. And Suryu, he's Awakened 7. He's one of my stronger familiars. He can tank a couple of the hits with Kona. There's a lot of whales on my server as well, for those that don't know. So like top 30 is pretty competitive for us. So it's pretty common to run into people with maxed out plus 300 familiars, and my setup is not maxed out right now. You might notice my Shrimpaler, I'm literally using a Shrimpaler that's plus 75 right now. The reason for that is I used to have a different formation that utilized Stagthorn and Hippocampus, but Stagthorn and Hippocampus seem to really pull away after a while in terms of their performance, especially since they weren't awakened high enough. So I'm trying to kind of shift my formation, also to add another fire element to potentially kill the Tokos out there that are super annoying. But I think most people don't have the Boar Awakened 10 yet, which is going to bring out the maximum ability. Again, if you don't know what Boar's ability is here, let's take a look at the ability. So when an ally familiar falls, it restores 10% of lost HP. It gives attack plus 30%, defense plus 40%, and max HP plus 20%, and all crowd control plus 10%. So stacking that up to 4 times, he could potentially get up to 120% attack. He could get 160% defense, and he could get plus 80% HP and 40% crowd control. So he is very powerful. It's just a matter of making sure that he is kind of the second to die, or the second to last to die. If you can get him to where it's like him and Toko or him and Shrimpaler still being alive, that's definitely going to be an ideal situation, and you can make good use of him. I think he's just difficult to understand because he is a mid-range familiar. We don't have him Awakened 10 yet, so a lot of people are trying to run him at like Awakened 7, Awakened 6 in meta compositions, and the reality is you have to adjust your composition in order to compensate him. I find attackers works better. I was experimenting for a while with my Penguicorn. So I do have a Penguicorn that I was throwing in place of Shrimpaler here and Suryu. There was a point where I had Might up front, Penguicorn in back. I was also looking at putting Bird in the formation, potentially. My Bird is Awakened 4, but he might be able to fit up front here. But I think if you had like an Ebon Torex, for example, and you just put like Ebon Torex and Toko out front, I think that would be really powerful, or Ebon Torex and another strong melee character. Again, though, I think putting Might up front he'll just die too fast right now. But I think Ebon Torex and some other tanky familiar, along with maybe Toko, Boar, and either Shrimpaler or another DPS in the back, could be really powerful. I think a lot of people are trying to use Boar in like a frontline offensive capability, and I think he really excels at being backline, and I think that's where the disconnect really kind of happens here. Anyway, everybody, definitely go check out Crypto Crow's video if you haven't already. He goes into much more detail than me, and he shows really clear examples of kind of Boar's abilities for those that don't know what he's doing or what he's capable of. I would highly recommend that. I think Boar is definitely not to be discounted. Please don't throw Boar to the sideline or get rid of him. He's a very good familiar. I think it's mostly user error. It's mostly on our side. And I think it's because the Boar is changing the fundamental formation that we've had for such a long time. Anyway, everybody, thanks so much, and I will see you guys all later.